We're no strangers to love. You know the rules, and so do I.
It's
Our full
recording.
commitment's what I'm
Recording.
thinking. Never gonna give you up. Okay. Welcome to the first anniversary of the PI podcast. Just a bit of old millennial humor there. I'm your host, Matt, and with me, as usual, is my co host, political scientist, meme lord with a daughter he's never met, Borge.
What the daughter I've never made, first and foremost. What the hell? PI nyo, PI nating lahat. Board here at your service.
Yes, and as I mentioned, this is our 1 year anniversary. We've been doing this for a year. How does it feel, Borge? Like, I'm surprised. I'm pretty much surprised that we made it this far. Don't you think?
Yeah, even I'm surprised. But yeah, 1 year ng kapiayan.
Kapian or kapian. Oh, that's another name. Well. Congratulations, Borge. You couldn't
Yeah,
have done it without
congratulations,
me.
Matt.
Yeah. The thing is, let's just say this, that I'm not sure I've mentioned this before, but Board here is responsible for most of the memes. You can see is the meme lord. The logo, the second logo, and a lot of all the ads that you've been seeing in our page. So yeah, and he's been getting better and better actually. So you've seen, it's Board behind that, and also the editing. So yeah, it's an interesting journey of your graphic design skills.
No, I'm editing with you, so that's also something.
Right.
So, ano lang yan, tulungan. And for my case, well, Matt here is responsible, of course, for our interview. He's the primary interviewer for many of our interviews, one of our thematic establishers here. So yeah, I think he's our lead host for the past few, for this year. So, and then, Matt is the idea, and more or less, I'm also part of the logistics. So that's how we split works.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, but of course, we would like to thank all of you, who have been listening with us since day one around September of 2020, and just to perhaps an attendance, my goodness, but just just a report on how far we've come. So I'm opening now to Spotify. And according to here, we have about 5,421 starts, 3,800 streams, more than 1,000 listeners, and to be exact, 514 followers. That's of course people who decided to subscribe. So yeah, all 500 or more. Like, thank you for listening. And I think let's move on to Anchor. We have about 4,500 plays. That's exact, but yeah, that's around a rough number. And Borge, how many people do we have following us on Facebook?
Yeah, I think we're part of the Spartan thing there. Yeah, I think we had this. Wait, I'll double check. But yeah, while I'm opening my Facebook again, para sa ating mga tagapakinig dito sa Pilipinas, maraming salamat sa inyong patuloy na pakikinig at sana ipatuloy ang inyong pagantabay sa aming podcast.
Nako, nagtagalog na siya.
Ano tayo we have an international audience, and of course we also have our local what you call kapiais.
Mga kapiay natin. Salamat. Well, right now we decided to make this to be an anniversary special. We talk about the podcast and reflect on what this podcast is, what it has become, and what we want it to be in the future. So the title for this anniversary episode is Why PI? So, bakit a PI yung tawag natin? So, yeah,
kasi PI tayo.
So, Borge, do you remember mga PI tayo? But do you remember like day one? Like how did we start?
Day one. Wait, conceptualization or day one or the first recording?
Either, I suppose.
I think during the conceptualization, I think we were having a hard time trying to find the name. Actually, as far as I was concerned, yeah, we were having a hard time following a name. By the way, regarding the page followers, just
right.
since I'm looking at it right now, we have 464 followers as of now for Facebook. So,
right,
if you haven't followed us on Facebook, do check us out. But yeah, going back to the name. How did we end up with it?
Yeah.
We actually have again options that will never see the light of day.
Yeah.
And we
come on, give us an idea.
I think we have
I think before it was Banana Q&A, but eventually that became a podcast from another person. We have Satisfaction.
we have Polysatisfied. So yeah, we
Polysatisfied.
I think we just ended up with the simplest and most striking
In terms of
PI.
PI, which also means in idiom, putang ina. Which is, well, more like it is an expression in the Philippines we use for frustration, and we were in a way both frustrated. And actually, the podcast idea that, well, I don't. We can talk about your relationship with podcasting later, but I've been a long listener of podcasts, and I listened to my favorites like the Joe Rogan experience, the Jordan Peterson podcast, the Sinica podcast, one of the first that helped me out in my China studies classes. So I wanted to make a podcast for Philippine viewers, and there were a lot of podcasts already. And because of the pandemic, more and more podcasts started mushrooming, and even eventually, I mean, we're not the first. We are far from the first politically oriented podcast. In fact, there have been a few of mine in my circle who I will not name. I will not name names, but yeah, and then they were doing their own podcasts, but there were things that weren't exactly optimal in my opinion. And so I just hope that well, you and I would make our own spin. Normally you and I would have deep conversations, and hopefully we would like to expand that conversation with more and more people, and we have actually. So with regards to our conversation, what do you think is different with our conversations here in the podcast than perhaps other podcasting? And of course, like, what is your relationship with podcasting in general?
No, my my consumption with podcasting, I think, is a bit more minimal. But then again, I think we've been pondering on establishing a podcast ever way before. So pandemic gave us time, space, and more or less healthy amounts of boredom to actually start a podcast. But regarding our conversations on outside the podcast, I think the closest one would be the PI Raw. So the PI Raw is closest representation of how we converse outside the podcast. But within the podcast, I think we are a bit more structured. So, but yes, look out for PI Raw if you want something a bit more closer to how we actually talk on normal days.
Yeah. It's kind of intense, but actually those are some of our better episodes. More people have found that interesting. Like one was about
Everything is political.
Everything's political, and the other one is about the Philippine language. Sandang Tagalog tayo, di ba? Let's see if we do that again. So yeah, and I think now that we have the podcast, what do you think have you discovered as throughout the process of podcasting? This was we began this together. This was very different than what we have done before. So what do you think are the things that you've discovered?
I think we have progressed far from our first few episodes at this point. Not only in terms of the design, not only in terms of organization, but also again in terms of speaking. So for my case, I think I learned much from this one. In handling my own online classes, really. So conducting online classes is basically like conducting a podcast, but more or less live. So there are live reactions to it. Other than that, I think organizing thoughts would also be there. Practicing how to simplify things would be part of it. And of course, the old skills that I used to have that I am now again employing, editing skills. So yeah, I used to do that back in my undergrad. So balik na naman. So it's fine. So other than that, I think it's again we are tasked here not merely to express our ideas, but to express it in such a way that other people can understand it. And I think that's one of the harder challenges facing scholars. What about you? What did you learn from our experience for the past year?
Yeah, actually, I wonder if the listeners have noticed, but you and I are both nerds. Sometimes we have our own language, really, and sometimes, we're not that much wiser than most people, but we do speak in a different language. So I think the struggle there, hopefully, we try to speak in a more casual and understandable and comprehensive way. That's one thing. But trying to popularize systematic thinking about politics. Again, I think I failed to mention this earlier, but really, when you look at political podcasts in the Philippines, either they're extension of news outlets like ABS-CBN, like GMA News,
Mm.
or there are some people who just go on the soapbox, which are valid, but um, a bit less systematic than we are, and
Mm.
and hopefully, I think we are a bit explicit with our brand, which is, well,
Mm.
yes, it's political science. We use some concepts of political science, but at the same time, it's a mixture of philosophical attitudes as well.
Mm.
And we'll talk about this later. But if you notice from our content, we try to, well, not necessarily complicate, but at the very least, question basic assumptions with
Mm.
regards to certain issues.
Yeah.
Why this and why that. We always keep asking why. And if you
Mm.
notice, most of our episodes are like, why? And those are, and you and I have been trained under professors that say that why
Mm.
is the most important question. But one thing that I did learn about doing this, and despite my experience and
Mm.
heavy consumption of
Mm.
podcasts, it's not as easy, And I think
Yep.
you, as someone who has edited both of us, it's not as easy to sound competent and sound as articulate
Mm.
as our podcast. Because if listeners wonder what it's like editing, it's actually a lot. There are a lot of ums, a lot of pauses, dead airs, and you yourself have the
Mm.
so
Session na
so we
Windows
have our
XP lang eh.
ticks. Yeah. So we have our ticks, and part of the challenges there, the technical challenge that we realized is about being a podcast is that editing takes a lot of work just to make it sound a bit cleaner. I mean, sometimes the raws we've gotten better and there are less pauses,
Mm.
but still, it's, and sometimes we do also say stupid things, and I don't know if we are willing to say that, but there have been long paragraphs that have been cut because they're
Mm.
factually wrong and we make mistakes. So I
Mm.
suppose being confronted with your own voice first and foremost, it is only now that I have gotten used to editing my own voice and your voice as well. so yeah, it's it. See, right now I'm pausing. It's actually difficult to actually perform itself, and at the same time, it hasn't been easy growing this podcast.
Mm.
I mean, while we do appreciate the significant growth we have achieved, it's no minor feat. It's not as fast growing as other podcasts. We're not
Mm.
viral, but we do rank. Probably because our content is still challenging despite our best efforts. But we don't.
Mm.
We try not to go. How do you say this? To dilute our message, to dilute
Yeah.
our brand, and to go for always the popular opinions. It's a balance. Yes, we do choose topics that are important in the day, but
Mm.
also things that we feel like we can talk about confidently and what we feel are important. And then sometimes those do not match with the audience. So it has
Mm.
been difficult, and it's difficult to market our podcast. But those
Yep.
who have followed us, who have engaged with us, and who have asked us questions, I think we managed to get people that are appreciative and
Yeah.
high quality followers and listeners. Don't you think?
And thank you for all your support to those who actually engage with us, and those who are pondering on engaging with us. Just feel free to throw us a question every now and then.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is a curious balance. Again, I think we have decided on this one before that we should not pander to the crowd, but relevance is of course necessary. That's why we also have spin-offs on slices of pie. So that's
Mhm.
basically our way of balancing it out. But there are some topics that are just not popular yet important. And when we try to address those, we actually get some results. One of our episodes actually in political neutrality. It's not a popular. It's not a popular topic because
Yeah.
for now it's a sin to be neutral. But apparently there are people who actually share our sentiments, which is
Yeah.
quite surprising.
Yeah. And so we're actually surprised at the amount of which episodes got this number of views and so on. I mean, we have our favorite episodes, but some of the ones that are most viewed are actually quite interesting. And we'll get into that later on. But I suppose that's before we move there. I do want to ask, and we already touched on this, but what have been some of the challenges of doing our podcast? I mean, I mentioned that, of course, editing ourselves is a humbling process. I mean, how do you call it in Tagalog? Makapagkumbaba.
Yeah, nakakapagkumbaba.
Kumbaba. Well, yeah, sa sarili mo, di ba? Nakikinig ka sa
Yeah,
sarili mo, ganyan ba ako? Grabe.
yeah.
Why are you having a stroke? I sometimes question if I'm having a stroke or if you're falling asleep on me. So yeah, besides, of course, like performing as podcasting, what have you
Mm.
learned? Yeah.
Well, what are the challenges?
Mhm.
Well, again, other than the editing part, well, you have
Mhm.
the design, which I think
Mhm.
we will have a new set of designs soon to open up
Mm.
the new season.
Mhm.
So yeah, my designing skills have been a bit rusty for the past
Mhm.
few na so medyo
Mhm.
nahahasa na ngayon. So
Oh yeah.
other than that, again, organizing our thoughts, conveying it in a simple manner.
Mm.
It's hard to think systematically and coherent at the same time.
Mhm.
Albert Camus said that
Mhm.
what you lose in sanity, you gain in intensity.
Mhm.
And so, the more intense your thoughts are, the harder it is to convey it effectively.
Mhm.
Lalo na kung gusto natin yung topic. So if we get
Mhm.
overexcited, so that's another challenge I think that
Yeah.
we have learned to overcome, which is when we're excited about the topic,
Mhm.
we try to simplify it so that the
Mhm.
listeners can actually share our thoughts.
Mhm. Actually, speaking of that, another challenge personally is actually how to promote our podcast because, like, when you number one, why do we do our podcast and what are we offering to the world? And it's always like it actually sounds pretentious to say like we're offering our knowledge and expertise, and in a way,
Yeah.
some people had a problem with that. Marketing staff as experts. Well, in fact, like although we do cite research and we do cite our expertise. We do not. I hope we want to make this clear. We do not project ourselves as experts, but simply people with propositions like
Mm.
gadflies, as Socrates said.
Mhm.
Like who in a way
Wake,
wake
wag.
people
No, no,
up.
no, 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 no,
No, no,
not
no,
woke
no,
people. No, 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 not woke
no, no,
people.
no, no. Not
We
wake
don't
people.
cater to
No, we're
woke
not
people.
woke. No, no, no. More like another point of view. That like
Mm.
alternative takes. And of course, I think it took us a while. This came later after
Mm.
uh, months, in fact, half the year. We've discovered a tagline: political insights for the Palaging Inis.
Mm.
How did that come about? I think before that we had something different. Like do you remember that?
Yeah, I think well, it came about to an extent spontaneously, but I think we're also trying to establish our brand,
Mm-hmm.
or at least consolidate our brand.
Uh-huh.
And I think it was a reaction to, I think it was a reaction to the issue of thinking while one is,
Mm-hmm.
it's harder to think when one is aggravated or
Mm-hmm.
angry or filled with emotions. It's harder to
Mm-hmm.
think.
Mm-hmm.
So I think one of our brand
Mm-hmm.
dimensions is that we invite people to think despite of
Mm-hmm.
emotional attachments to a certain issue.
Uh-huh.
So thinking clearly,
Uh-huh.
something that we offer.
Yeah, exactly. Because we do choose topics that get people irritated. Nakakairita yung mga discussion natin. And we offer like neutral takes because people expect. I mean, say PI, and of course we use asterisk.
Mm.
Asterisk usually means number one, two assholes. Hey, the two asshole podcast. Of course. Or number two, it means that it's like when people censor, so
Mm.
people expect it to a lot of cursing.
Mm.
Well, the weird thing about that is that while people are cursing, we choose topics that make people curse. We
Mm.
also offer political insights that in a way, what's the word, calm people down, or at least
Mm.
balance out that
Yeah, the rage.
irateness, the
Yeah.
rage, because we do get irritated as well, but we never really get that mad. Although I think you and I have had disagreements in a few episodes, more in
Yeah.
particular, so America episode
Mm.
and the EDSA episode. We
Mm.
have like opposite ideas, and I think those are some of the more interesting episodes that we have made. Even
Mm.
how to deal with disagreement, and I think
Mm.
that's one of the things that we hope to demonstrate, I suppose, to
Mm.
how to talk to people you disagree with and
Mm.
still remain friends. So yeah.
Yeah.
And speaking of which, that's one thing that for speaking of which, let's move on to our top 5 episodes in no
Mm.
particular order. These are the ones that
Mm.
have the most views and listens and streams. And yeah, I think one of that is our first episode, Teaching at the Turning Point. So
Mhm.
you remember, which was like almost around a year ago.
Yep.
So what do you remember about that episode, Teaching at the Turning Point?
I think one of our main topics there is, again, challenges of teaching in such a politically charged society at this point.
Mhm.
I think we also raised the necessity of developing
Mhm.
civic education, which
Mm.
curiously now you're, of course, you're doing research on civic education, so
Yeah.
that's great. So we'll probably have more to say about civic education as soon as your
Mhm.
data is properly organized. But yeah,
Uh-huh.
I think those are the topics that we tackled for teaching turning point. So yeah, we are educators.
Mhm.
We need to recognize that we are educators. So we try to
Mm.
share our experiences and our practices.
Yeah, and I think I remember this in particular,
Mm.
because we started something that we can both talk about.
Mm.
Since we're both teachers, why not reflect on like our role as teachers? And
Mm.
I think to this day, like you said, I'm doing research on it, and I actually literally imported and borrowed some lines from that first episode to a lot of my presentation whenever I talk about civic education.
Mm.
And I think it's to this day, it's still a question. Some people think that civic education is to make people think the same way, but
Mm.
it's the opposite. It's actually, when you say inspire critical thought, it should create a diverse set of opinions,
Mm.
depending on someone's context or sentiment or
Mm.
whatever, or thinking process or so that's and I think that's the beautiful thing. The problem is, like, some people, like, again, I think we still see this today when people say
Mm.
educate, it's to make people think like us, because if
Yeah.
they're educated they would find this opinion, but that's not necessarily
Yeah,
the case.
lumutang
At the
uli.
very least,
Recently, I think
yeah.
lumutang uli yung bobotante discourse.
Mhm.
I thought
Oh
that
my
that thing
goodness.
was dead.
I think we should that should be another episode soon,
Mm.
with especially with upcoming elections
Mm.
much closer. And we even talked about the elections then,
Mm.
about voters education, and I think
Mm.
we made a hot take on that. You remember that? I mean, the hot take was that it's actually political campaigning in disguise. So don't trust voters education too much, or don't make it a panacea. It's not.
Mm.
It is one of the preconditions for a functioning democracy, but it's not the end all and be
Mm.
all. It's a precondition, but not everything. There's still the process of discussing, and that leads to our next two episodes. Again, two of the early episodes are some of our best hits, which kind of it's a kind of like a weird message, since a lot of our early stuff are our best stuff, a lot of our best, our most viewed. Yeah, well, they're their longest, so
Yeah.
that's why it's the most number of views. So we have two. Number one, why do Filipinos like dictators? And we were reflecting on martial law and why people
Yeah.
like Marcos, and by extension, in a way, Duterte. Like, what do you remember fondly about that episode, or not so fondly?
Yeah, I think I shared my own personal experience with that. I mean, I grew up in a pro Marcos household, so I know
Mhm,
I know both sides of this entire shit. So I think I expressed
mhm.
my hatred towards Marcos at that episode.
Oh
So
yeah.
I can reiterate it again soon. I will never tire bashing Marcos as a bad
Mhm.
dictator. So that's
Wait,
not the last time you'll hear about that one.
yeah. So you're saying it's not only that most people say he was a dictator, right? But you're actually saying he was not enough of a
Yeah,
dictator.
he was
Like,
not
he's
even a good one.
oh yeah, which is always another way of critiquing Marcos. And
Yeah.
I think that one is particularly remember, because usually after the first episode, sometimes the hardest step is the second episode. How do you follow up?
Mm.
Honestly, I look back and I still think that some episode one is still one of our best.
Mm.
Qualitatively speaking.
Mm.
I listened to it. It still checks out. Uh, Episode two, on the other hand, if you recall, I think it was because of technical difficulties. Like, my mic was bad, and I think we had a hard time. I think
Interconnection, I
the
think.
yeah, like, well, there were some issues with the chemistry at that time,
Mm.
so we had to record it twice. Uh,
So
but
yeah.
yeah, I think that was yeah, I think it was the only time, thankfully, that we had to re-record an
Mm.
episode. But thankfully, I think it turned out pretty great. Yeah, and
Yung ba
yeah.
na-record natin? I forgot we actually recorded that one.
Yeah, well, that's what stuck with me, and that's another technical aspect. Sometimes podcasts, they don't. I mean, you don't publish them on the first go. Sometimes you have to re-record. And I think at the time, I was using my brother's old mic, but that's
Mm.
why we really invested in
Mm.
quality equipment. So this one is literally the industry grade Audio Technica P48. So in case you're wondering,
and I got the
the
weirdly shaped
quality of
one.
my mic. For those of you listening at home, if you don't know the video, he actually has a microphone shaped like a dog's dick, which is red and bent, which is much cheaper. But if you notice in some episodes, his is louder. So to the microphone's credit, it really makes it loud.
It's a gaming microphone, so talagang
Yeah.
pang mura to eh.
Pagmura yan. Pang Dota. So yeah, that's one thing. I think it's really, well, it's a question that some people's mind, because again, why it also touches on why do people choose people like Duterte? Why do voters vote like Duterte? And what do you remember? Like, what was our prime insight? Why did people choose anti-democratic dictators?
Yeah, I think we pointed to the existence of illiberal and autocratic values, which again, these are themes that we would elaborate again in the future, since shit will happen. Shit will hit the fan anyway, so we'll be the first ones to say that it will hit the fan. Other than that, I think it's also our. Did I remember? I'm trying to remember our arguments on that one. What else did you remember? But I think that's the only things that I did.
Well, what I do try to say is that the people who support dictators are also, again, I remind people that they're also humans who have also experienced the same frustrations as the democratic and liberal people. And their response is precisely like they want to use violence because of the perceived lack of discipline. And you can see, but we share the same observation of like having unruly traffic, uneven implementation of the law. So what they hope is to have another Lee Kuan Yew, same as Singapore, and someone with an iron hand. So someone who is a father figure, a paternal authority. So it is a symptom again of a lot of the lack of order, and as a result, they want stricter implementation of the law. And I think it's a classic, almost psychological explanation. So you have to know where they're coming from before you castigate them, or before you criticize them. So
I think
look back on that.
Yeah, that was our takeaway from that one.
So let's look back at the greatest hits. So for new listeners, go back and follow. And I think related to that is, I think the reason why we rely on leaders is because we ourselves as citizens cannot bear to solve our disagreements with other people, which leads to our episode 3, another one of our our most viewed episodes, is why can't we be friends? Why can't we be friends?
That one.
What do you say about that episode?
Yeah, that one is on again. The necessity of political discussion. How should political discussion go? And I think was it that? I think we also discussed the necessity of civility here, as well as some Aristotelian standards on civic engagement. What about you? What did you remember from that episode?
Well, I always, whenever I engage in the internet, I always try to have this mindset, was that when you try to talk to people, engage with people, do not think that you are right. Don't try to be right. You always try to seek the truth. That's what most people think. Say, tama ako, ganito dapat, ganito. So it's a difficult thing, and I even fail at this sometimes, admittedly. But it is a simple message, really, and it is try to find common ground, in talking to each other and having civility. Do not assume you're right, but part of them is right. So it's trying to, if I were to add to that episode, we also try to have the habit of steel manning, which is to try and strengthen the argument of the other and to attack the strongest parts of the arguments, not straw manning. When you say straw manning, attacking the weakest parts of the argument, or exaggerating the weaknesses of their argument rather than the argument as is. So and I think that's another topic that's worth revisiting, because people still have a hard time debating.
Yeah, you're right. You're right about that. People still have a hard time debating, and I think I do have some, not necessarily change of heart regarding that, but I think the problem is too deep at this point that it would take an entire generation before we actually come close to such values of civility. Yes, I'm seriously giving up on people.
Wow!
I'm seriously giving up on people with solid values and attitudes, you seriously just cannot convince them. You just can't. And if they don't have the values of civility, then more so that they will never be, they will never engage. They will never engage in such discussions.
Well, well, my instinct for understanding is like, as I suppose, number one, people are getting older, so it's difficult to get them to learn new tricks. But literally, by neurologically speaking, the synapses of their brain are being more stable, and it's actually much more difficult for them to form new connections and relations. So that's one. I think it's another challenge, really, is to not always speak your arguments as such, but to actually use the language that they use. Learn to speak language of the other. I think that's one of the arguments done. This is my Catholic bias this year, but by John Henry Newman, he called it the grammar of assent. When you say assent, you use imagery that is more or less universally, or at the very least in common. People find like value, like the idea of, you, for example, if the other person values family, you use metaphors of family. If that person is, again, more patriarchal, you use patriarchal images and metaphors. That's one way of forwarding your argument. You try to reach out, but again, not everyone can reach out to everyone, because sometimes we're just live in different worlds. So that's another problem. But it's a good exercise to try and to keep yourself humble and to open your mind.
Or I think the question that we can explore next time is: are children being trained to have such a capacity, or is the youth being trained to have such a capacity, or are they inheriting the same intolerance as the older generation? I think that's
or
another
gaining
issue.
a new form of intolerance, which is, and I think we've talked about this a bit, but progressives and cancel culture, it's just another form of intolerance in reverse. They're just intolerant about things that did not tolerate you, which is like the church, conservatives, your parents, authority, that kind of thing. So and it's a difficult thing to try and make people be friends. It's one of our shorter episodes, actually, but it's also one of the hardest goals to accomplish. Try to get people to be friends, because apparently I use the word friends here because it's only friends that can talk to each other and to criticize each other, and to trust each other, to listen to each other. That's why it's important. I think that's what Aaron says. Friendship might be the closest thing, kind of love, to establish like a functional citizenry. When citizens can talk to each other, we see each other as friends, because friends see each other as equals. You do not say, like, you speak out against that person, they say, how dare you, but you also don't speak out and just to hurt. You speak out as a friend. When your friend is doing something wrong, you speak plainly about it. So that's one thing. Well, we hopefully, again, that's another thing we might want to revisit. But oddly enough, related is our next one, which is much later, further on, episode 14. And this is actually one of our, like, surprisingly, in 2021, one of our most viewed episodes, which is about political neutrality. Do you remember this one? Like, why did you try to talk about this topic?
That's a tricky topic, really. So we had some certain caveats regarding neutrality. Again, at this time, at this day and age, to be neutral is to sin, as far as this usual woke shit is concerned, wherein they equate neutrality with injustice. I mean, I think we made some clarifications on it. I think our main argument is that neutrality is necessary to think clearly. It is a temporary condition. Something that we both agreed on. It's a temporary condition, but it is still necessary. And you miss out on so much if you're not capable of being neutral. Because if you're not capable of being neutral, everything you think about, every analysis that you conduct is just to support your own biases. So what else did we say about neutrality at that point? But I think that's we reacted to this viral shit.
I mean, this is too well. We talked a lot of ground, and that's why again, this is one of my. Well, it's also one of my favorite episodes, really, because we covered so much. We answered so many questions.
Yeah,
but I think one important thing is that we talked about the old adage which says that neutrality favors the oppressor. I'm paraphrasing, and of course, you made a great point saying that what if non-neutrality, or taking a side and going against the oppressor, and you failing actually favors the oppressor. That's actually a
Mhm.
very good point. Do you still believe in that, or you
Yeah,
mean?
I think I made that point regarding the left. So yeah, I would keep I would keep on
In
bashing the
particular?
left here in our podcast. And that's not the last time that you would hear about. I think we also have a spin off regarding the left.
Hmm.
So we'll have more about them since they're losers. But yeah, I
Yeah.
think I made some. I think that's basically the result of several years of worth of study we're in.
Uh-huh.
Fighting against injustice itself can support the system of
Mm.
injustice by
Yeah.
constantly losing
Yeah.
in the face of the offender.
Hmm.
So, but yeah, I think what we try to pin down during that episode would be again how to think properly
Mm.
about politics.
And how should we think?
Yeah,
Some.
which is not to be swept away by polarities that there are
Mhm.
not only two sides to anything. There
Mhm.
are never two sides to anything,
Right.
and the other sides you can only expose if you stand in a condition of temporary neutrality. You can only expose those sides.
Yeah. And the funny thing, well, I think the importance of neutrality here is in case you don't necessarily agree with either side, it's okay to be neutral, in a way, as a transitionary state position. More
Mm,
like while you're trying to decide for yourself,
mm,
reflect on your values and reflect on the issue itself when
mm,
you're gathering, you you can. It's okay to remain neutral, but it's important to have that. I mean, to have that process, but it's important to choose eventually.
mm.
It's like I even said this. I remember, it's like being in the toilet. It's okay to go there once in a while, but if you're there for more than 3 hours, you should see a doctor. Or you're there for too long, that's a problem. And that's just, it's okay to be neutral, but not through cowardice.
Yeah, yeah,
Once,
yeah, yeah. That's also
yeah.
one of our takeaway points.
But you can be ethically neutral. Yeah, ethically neutral when you use it as a place to think.
Mm,
Yeah, that's really, and that's basically the pattern here of all our episodes. It's about
mm,
thinking, and
mm,
neutrality is only for thinking, not necessarily just to be a fence sitter for the sake of being a fence sitter, but really to choose the right side through proper deliberation, or
mm.
possibly like what you said, the
Mm.
discovery of other sides.
Yep.
Right? You
There's
mentioned that. Yeah,
yeah to establish other sides. Not
there's
everything
more than
is
two sides.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I think our last and most recent one, which I think, quite honestly, is actually one of our more emotional episodes. Not so much about thinking, but really about being Filipino. It's episode 16, and it's in Tagalog. Bakit
Ah,
mahirap
yeah.
maging Pilipino?
Yeah. Bakit Bitin,
I
Filipino.
think this was particularly emotional for you because you really went on a long tirade against this Baluyot, I think is his name, which is a funny name. Talking about his pist. Yeah. And he talks about, like, of course, why do people leave our country? Is it because our country, even to this day, even while we are recording right now, it's a friggin' toilet, But what can you say about this episode? What did we discover from this episode?
Yeah, that long tirade. Nasa introduction pa lang yun.
Oh my,
Yeah, so yeah,
galit na galit ka.
the article, Juju Baluyat's article, which I believe
Mhm,
is of course lopsided, thoroughly lopsided,
mhm, mhm,
uh, more or less accused everyone not leaving the Philippines of
mhm,
being unreasonable or being a coward or yeah. And
mhm,
I think one of my main arguments is that not everyone has an option to leave in the first place.
mhm,
So he ignores that. And another
mhm,
one would be he said that the house is already dilapidated, when in fact,
mhm,
Filipino society, if he would actually look at it properly
mhm,
without any bias, damn dipshit,
mhm. Ooh.
if he would actually look at it properly, it's stable. It may
Mhm,
be rotting. It may be rotting in the inside. It may be filled
mm,
with godforsaken termites, but it is stable,
mm,
and that is another problem. We are a
mhm,
stable society.
mm, mm.
It's crappy, but it's stable.
Yeah. I mean, it's one. I think that teaches us to be thankful that it hasn't gotten worse.
Mm,
It's funny, like I during the early parts of the pandemic, I did receive, like, never trust Viber accounts, but there were messages about people wandering the streets, probably looting and pillaging, but
mm,
that turned out to be fake news, which is weird. And people aren't, despite being really hungry and suffering, afraid. The closest thing it happened, actually, this is sad. If you recall this video in
mm,
Twitter, wherein people like stormed the mall in Las Piñas for
mm,
vaccines, and that was a sad thing. But it's
mm,
really like we don't really have scenes where people riot. Not like in the French Revolution or even in recent, even recent American current events, like the George Floyd or Black Lives Matter. We never really had that those kinds of violent uprisings, at least not in recent America, at least based on our reports, that we know of. So if you can say something about that, does it have something to do with that? Like Filipinos are, really more docile in that case, or what do you think? Why that?
Not those docile can be a probable adjective, but it's not exhaustive. We have effective coping mechanisms, and we are creative in creating coping mechanisms and resilience. Christ Almighty, I think that's a more appropriate term. Really, we are resilient people. So that's a matter of fact. It's sad, but it's there. So we're not dilapidated. Our society is not about to collapse. It's apocalyptic to say that it's about to collapse, and it's stupid not to leave.
Right.
So yeah. So
I think that leads to another episode, which is, of course, we talked about resilience. But here, Bakit Mahirap maging Pilipino? I think people are attracted by the title, I think. Like, it's in Tagalog, and it resonates, But I think the message kind of, it shows the opposite, which is like, then kahit mahirap, Filipino na naman tayo eh. I mean, that's one thing we did. We cannot escape being Filipino, whether it's difficult or easy, So we simply must learn to live with it, And I think, do you have anything to add on that, and since we're revisiting it? Like, is there something else that we can do for accepting being Filipino?
Well, first and foremost, let's abandon this ideal of leaving or any analysis concerned with it, because that basically, not only is it impossible for many Filipinos, but it ignores certain problems that are more fundamental, just like Baluyat's article, which he basically ignores the problem of stability in the Philippines. There's a problem with us being a stable society.
We're too stable. What a problem. Help. Please knock us down.
So yeah, it's something that he ignores, and it's something shared by more Filipinos. So he speaks in the position of privilege, and leaving the Philippines is for many, it's only for a few. It's a privilege of a few to leave. How can we be better? That is I don't have a concrete answer at this point regarding that one. But it would be a difficult question.
Yeah. Well, I think this is another possible future episode where we can update with you and I are still researching on resilience. This is our platform where we can promote our research. Research dudes. But anyway, So, and I think that's one question we need to answer. Why is our society so stable? We haven't had a civil war. We haven't had a major riots, revolts. We're just, and people barely even mobilize for protest, average protest. I mean, of course, there are a lot. Yes,
a lot. No.
Well,
konti lang yung puta.
In social media, you see some of them like in UP Diliman, of course, but there's usually only alumni and students from UP Diliman. So it's not, again, a wide cross sector.
They cannot reach the critical mass. They haven't reached critical mass for a long time.
And that's another question we might want to go into and explore. So those are our top 5. Those are our top 5 questions. What do you think about them so far? I mean, is there a pattern connecting them?
Again, we still have all our why questions, and I think we touched upon topics that are too deep that it really cannot be encompassed by a single episode. Hence, we are still entertaining the possibility that we would re-raise such questions. Probably rephrase them, reframe them, but we would provide new data on it. We'll probably have new interviews on it. I think our topics cannot be exhausted by a single episode. So I think that's one pattern that I see.
Yeah, and that's fun. I also another pattern that I see actually, and I think it's related to what your observation. But one of the earlier comments that's one of our listeners shared with me was that he noticed that most of the episode medyo nabibitin siya. It's not complete. And I think in a way that's a good thing. I told him that's a good thing because, well, number one, it's an invitation for listeners to join in the conversation. But number two, that's the nature of the topics that we are talking about. We picked that's in a way a lot of problems are like that. They don't
Yeah.
have easy answers that we can neatly close. We can
Yeah.
only show, I suppose, our own perspectives, you and I. And
Mm.
sometimes you and I adjust as people
Mm.
who disagree. But at the same time, these are not end all be all. And I think that's one attitude we want to promote regardless thinking. It's never completely
Never ends.
close-ended. Yeah, it
Yeah.
never ends. So
yeah.
yeah.
That's basically what dialectical thought is, according to
Oh.
the philosopher Jose Ortega y Gasset.
Mhm.
So for him, dialectical thought, systematic thought in a dialectical sense, is always continue moving forward. So yeah, that's a good lesson regarding that. And
Mhm.
I think what we want to impart to our listeners is
Mhm.
this habit of thinking. We are not
Mhm.
here to provide answers, really. Do you agree with
Right.
that one? We provide more questions as far as I'm concerned than answers.
Yeah.
Because we're inviting our listeners not to agree with us per se,
Mhm.
but to examine their own thoughts.
Mhm.
Usual catchphrase go, we need to examine our own values.
So if we're gonna say that in Tagalog, I'm trying to think of a catchphrase, but PI, palaging isip.
Palaging isip.
Palaging
Palaging isip.
palaging ini,
Palaisip. Palaisip.
palaisip. Palaisip.
Palaisip.
It's one word, but that's basically it. Like, well, um, I don't know.
We
But
are
yeah.
not bearers of absolute truth here.
No one is.
No one is, and we, of course, we are not comfortable saying that we're just an opinion podcast. No, we're not. We
No.
invite our listeners to ask questions
Mhm.
on such matters. You don't need to agree with us. I think we also have
Oh.
some listeners who actually disagree with.
Oh hell yeah,
with some. So,
definitely. Oh wait, before while we're on this topic, do you know have you thought of any ways that we can in a way improve our podcast, because we have reached a huge audience. In fact, we ranked a few times in Apple Podcast and Spotify. I think we reached even number 5 in podcast, even beyond uh certain network television podcasts. We have news outlets. So we've done a lot despite being an indie podcast with just you and me and against the world. But is there something we need to do more in a way, like to improve? Like we talked about self-criticism before in the podcast. So what can we do better? I think
what we can do better would be, well, I think we can work on our spin-offs more. PI Escuela is, of course, still under development, so we can develop on that.
It's hard.
It is hard. As for poster designs, yes, it can still be developed. It will be developed. So, as far as I'm concerned, marketing, as far as marketing is concerned, I think we need to have some more popular gimmicks. We can go live soon. I don't know. We may show our faces. So look upon us and tremble.
Finally, you see our faces. And to those who don't know us, yeah.
I think, for our case, I think we need to formulate more intriguing contentions and arguments. We always set the bar high. So we may have intrigued people for our season, but we can tone up, or not tone up, but what we call that, increase the heat. Increase the heat for next season.
Yeah,
and ask more controversial questions like,
that's true.
Why is dirt fat, or what?
Careful.
Okay, no fat shaming,
Actually, PI can also say politically incorrect, but Bill Maher already has that. So
yeah, we already politically incorrect without us.
Yeah. Well,
what about you? Any ideas?
I do like that idea. Like, we ask more challenging questions, but I do. Well, just to comment on our dynamic, and I think we've gotten a bit better at talking to each other. In fact, you'd think that it's our natural conversation style would be good enough for the podcast, but we did improve a lot.
Yeah.
Sometimes we still talk over each other, and that is kind of throw each other off a bit. But I think we have found like a better system of talking with each other at the very least. But I do hope that we can even challenge each other a bit more. Like, I do. Well, while they are stressful sometimes, like episode 5 and episode, I think was that the one about Magellan and the one about Edson.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that we really disagreed. But I was hoping that we could actually challenge each other more, no holds barred na wala tayo mahiya. Na parang bardagulan na tayo.
Sige, awayin kita.
Ah, sige, actually, I sometimes even say, why don't we, sige, magbarda tayo. Bardagulan na. Or even like our guests. Actually, let's talk about our guests. And we do want, if you're listening, we do want to thank you, like the people, the podcasters who have had us on their podcast, and those podcasters or other people that have been in our podcast. In fact, some of my favorite episodes that are not listed in the top 5 episodes. Number 1 were the Q&A episode. For one thing, it was a chance for us to introduce ourselves, our political orientations, and we even looked at the different topics like the soul, slavery.
Uy, may isa pang tanong from that, so we need to allot the PI nyo for that. May isa pang question sumabit eh.
Oh, really?
Yeah, our about our actual our
That's
take
overdue.
on our take on right-wing politics.
Oh my goodness.
That's overdue, but yes, we will have a PNU for that.
Yeah. But what I also loved about the episode, besides of course the variety of topics that we did, was because it showed that our friends supported us. A lot of the questions came from our friends. So it's really good, and especially each time a listener calls in, no matter how simple the question is, it actually it's very encouraging. And it does challenge us. I think later on our next PI is a movie that we did not, neither of us watched yet. So once we watch it, we'll definitely tackle it. We do appreciate those recommendations. They recommended something to us. We usually recommend other people. That's
yeah.
So that's a fun thing. Well, another favorite episode I do like is, I think our episode with Father Fial, which surprisingly had a lot of I think it's our second most viewed video in the YouTube channel.
Pinasalan pa yun.
300 plus, which felt holy as you can be. And it made me feel like you were blessed by his presence. I think this is the first time you met a young priest.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite episode?
First time I've ever talked with a priest.
Oh wow! In a long time?
In a long time.
Yeah.
The last priest that I actually talked to was, I think, my grandfather way back when I was 5 or 6. So
oh my goodness.
Other than that,
you mean you never went to confession in like grade school or high school?
Talking. It is not really talking. That's confession. So
okay, all right, okay. So we never talked to a young priest. There you go.
Yeah. I think that would also be part of my favorites. So again, also the political neutrality episode. I really like that. The Magellan one. And our episode on heroes, I actually like those.
Yeah. We actually did a re-release, and so it has a better. I can feel that was one of your favorite episodes because you made a re-release with a good poster. I love that poster, by the way. Some of your best work. Okay. I think that's everything.
Yeah. Summary for 1 year.
Okay. So shall we move on to recommendations?
Yeah.
All right. So I think since this is not a particular topic, we're just recommending things that we like and what we're enjoying this week. So what do you have to recommend for us?
Yeah. For my case, my sanity for the past year had been partially due to 90% due to again me being a bibliophile. So, and that's a fancier term for book hoarder. So a bibliophile. So I've been reading a lot. I've been reading and buying a lot of books. So I'm recommending. My list is not exhaustive because I have a long list of very good suppliers of books. But I think for now I can share at least three of my suppliers. No, make it 4. Make it 4.
Oh my goodness.
Make it 4. Make it 4. Right. So we will link you. we will put the link, their respective secondhand bookstores in our caption. But first would be Roel's Bookstore. They are reliable. They have a collection of rare books, and I usually build up piles there because I don't order in bulk. So the one time I had a pile of I think 6 books. Bago ko siya pinadeliver in the span of
I think that's
2 months.
Rose Bookstore is actually like legendary, right?
Yeah.
For being in a good book, a bookstore for academic, philosophical,
Yeah.
and leftist bookstores. So
Yeah, and
it used to be like hit with college students, but now they're
yeah,
online. So that's
yeah.
unfortunate.
So yep, they're online. You can file your books there if you don't want them.
Yeah.
So if kung gusto mo masulit yung delivery mo.
Okay.
The other one is page 394. I order some books there. So they also have a good, naman sila more of not necessarily secondhand, but shipped
Mhm.
shipped
You're
books. So
right.
they also have a good collection on literature and philosophy. So if you're
Oh.
interested in that, page 394. They also
Mhm.
accept pre-orders if you want. So kung suki ka na, they would allow you to have special orders. The other one would be BookTube. Also a collection of rarities, but they also have religious books. I think they have a large inventory of religious books. So if you're interested in theology, you can check out their website.
Mhm.
Last in the list.
Okay.
Last in the list is the. I'm choosing who in the last. Paperful. Yeah, this is for pre-ordered
Oh,
books.
I
Paperful
love
is for
those.
pre-ordered books. So if you have the budget,
Mhm.
and if you cannot find the book online or in secondhand bookstores, or if you're too lazy to do it in book depository, which we need to try that on book depository. Yeah, you can order it via Paperful. So Paperful that.
And take note, this is not sponsored by any of
Yeah,
these.
it is
He's
not.
doing this out of the kindness of his heart,
Yeah, it is.
But we should probably do that. We should
Uh,
try to get them, like, have a code and say, if you're a listener of the PI Pause, text PI.
yeah,
Yeah, we
hey,
should.
we're planning we are planning a spin-off on book reviews. If you
Yeah,
we
we
would
should.
probably launch that in the second season, and with that,
Mhm.
you would be exposed to more booksellers if you're
Yeah.
not yet part of the secondhand bookstore. But if you go to any of these secondhand bookstores, you would eventually end up in a rabbit hole. Hence, Matt.
Oh.
Matt, eventually,
uh-huh.
ikaw ang nadamay ko dito eh. So,
Yeah. He has been my, how you say, recruiter in my, also, well, I'd like my drug lord. I don't know if that's the right
pusher,
but yeah, he's drug pusher. There we go. A book pusher.
book pusher.
He's a book pusher.
Sabi
Oh
mo
my
pa dati, hindi
goodness.
ko interesado. Pag-isipan ko muna ng second hand.
Yeah. And now I have an entire library I have built over the years. So I suppose I'll just second that recommendation. Oh my god. But you should work on that, maybe. We should partner up with these guys, if
Yeah.
ever.
Well, let's
Uh-huh.
have the spin-off first, and we'll partner with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I suppose one thing I'd like to recommend, besides, of course, seconding that, was, well, okay, two things. Number one, I think the band Steam Powered Giraffes, SPG.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've recommended Borge in this one as well.
Now it's stuck for 2 weeks.
Oh, the particular song is Honeybee. It's one of their best songs, but they do have other songs. They're basically performing arts students who, of course, integrate their lessons in mime and clowning, and they write songs that are thematic, steampunk themed. And this one song is a beautiful love song called Honeybee, and it's still one of their best songs to this day. Some of their early stuff is like the best. Right now, they've had several members that have switched from time to time, but I think the core members
are still there.
Still there.
The twins.
Yeah.
The twins.
The twins still there. One of them is trans, and that was very controversial, but I think it adds flavor to the band, really. And yeah. They even have this really good trans themed song, the Transform. It's really good. So it's about her begging the listeners to love her despite her being a trans, transforming. So it's a great thing. And another one, and I also, besides, of course, a band that I'm listening to, it's music. I do want to promote a few local podcasts in the podcasting community. Like two of the ones, one of my favorites. Number one is Now Open PH podcast, it's basically like they talk about sex and education. It's sex education, but it's like more sex than education, really. They talk about things like contraceptives, they talk about BDSM, they talk about pornography, all sorts, and they don't talk about the news, also research, and things like they do have guests like a practicing dominatrix. You have a doctor that specializing in sex. It's very interesting. So especially with this more or less still conservative cyberspace, it's a really good podcast. They also have live shows on Tuesdays at 8 p.m. and you'd see me there. I'm a regular there, actually. In fact, you'd see I'm a top fan. So it's interesting though. Yeah.
Live show.
And another a live. Well, no, it's not lewd. Although they do talk about lewd. Sometimes they often get taken down. but usually it's because they talk about stuff like genitals and sex acts, but mostly in an educational way, not just for the sake of titillation. Titillation. And the other podcast I do like is the Pisara Tales, which talks about, of course, the experiences of young educators like ourselves. In fact, we do hope to have them on the podcast sometime, but he has some good interviews with some young teachers, and it's really good to hear the like reflections of and experiences of different teachers of our age, of different subjects. Of course, it's hosted by Sir Jay, who is mainly a chemist, but he also talks about other forms of education, etc. Education also, music education, etc. All sorts, So yeah, Pisara Tales. And this is, of course, we shall call you soon, Sir Jay. Hope to have you on. So these are some of the in our anniversary, we're promoting other Filipino podcasts. That's great. That's great. Okay, and thank you for this anniversary, sharing this anniversary moment with us. It's in a year. It's looking forward to a year to come. And if we do have announcements for, we will be taking a quick break because really this is the finals week, and Borj and I are grading papers. So we will be back in October for a Halloween edition. Special. So we'll start season 2 then. So and we will try to have a live session. Once we fix
our faces.
No, we have the technicalities of it. We'll figure out the technicality. And the faces.
For technical issues.
Yeah. And I think, of course, the spin-offs. What can you say about the spin-offs boards that we've created and will continue? Yeah.
Yeah, we will continue our spin-offs. If there's a hot news to rant about, we would keep on doing slices of PI. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, or queries, and I think we do have a couple in line, we would continue our PI Nyo, which is our new Q&A spin-off. So yeah, we will continue the spin-offs. The regular episodes, however, as you said, we will restart in October. Pahinga-pahinga muna. So yeah. Live. We need most of the technical issues are with my face, not with yours.
Oh, come on. Who knows? Maybe
make it less shocking.
Actually,
make it less shocking.
You might have some fans as a result of the live. Who knows? Anyway, so look out for that eventually. And thank you for sharing this 1 year, and here's to another year. But until our new season in October.
Magandang gabi, mga ka-PI.